Not getting it.
Just take a moment, let everybody get in.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. Hope everyone is well. Nina, my wife, ordered a piece of furniture from an antique shop in Europe, and they shipped it, and they ship it DHL, which is a funny company. And we're expecting the shipment. It was supposed to come yesterday. Now it's supposed to come today. So I'm just watching the front yards. Bert, if you see a yellow and orange DHL truck drive by, would you tell me?
Yes.
Because he's 3 doors down from me, so they'll come by you before they'll come by me. And I have to
Definitely sit in the living room and watch outside.
Yeah, do that, because I have to catch the guy, because we did this once before. We had a shipment coming from Israel, and the guy came and he said we weren't here, and we were here watching for it. So this time we opened the gate, put a big sign saying DHL here. Who knows? I have to it's a piece of furniture and it's in a crate. So apparently I have to uncrate it to make sure that it's the right thing. Because if it's not,
damaged.
I'm not going to send it back, because it cost me another God knows how much. It almost cost more to send it than it did to buy it. But my wife fell in love with this piece of furniture. So what are you going to do?
Did you see it when you were in Europe on vacation, or?
No, she saw it on a catalog online.
Oh.
Oh.
Don't tell me that. Don't tell me that.
Tell
me, oh, what a wonderful idea, Rabbi.
Oh, marvelous, marvelous.
I'm going to make her very happy. Don't tell me it's not the right thing to do. I did buy it with a credit card, so there's a little bit of consumer protection, but not much.
Does it give you return postage on the credit card?
Last time, it was we ordered tile from a company in Israel for the pool, and it was a fortune to get it here, and it was supposed to come, and they said they didn't deliver it that day, so they say it'll come the next day, and then it'll come the next 10 days go by. 10 days. I was talking every day to a woman in Chicago who's the distribution lady for DHL International. She said, I don't understand why this isn't happening. I don't either. Could you just, it took them 2 days to get it from Jerusalem to Van Nuys, and 12 days to get it from Van Nuys to my house, which is 1.6 miles away.
Heavy traffic.
I said, I'll come and pick it up. You're not allowed to do that. I said, why not? I got a car. I got a truck. I can go. So I'm watching for this thing. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well.
Thank you.
According to the LA County Health Department, we are soon to leave the orange tier and adopt the yellow tier, which means we can actually start thinking about when we want to come back together in person. But we'll keep doing this for a while because it's convenient, and frankly, I love you, but I don't want to put on shoes. So it's been really nice being together. So we have been studying the 3rd section of the Hebrew Bible called Ketuvim, and the case that I've made to all of you is that Ketuvim is the place where the biblical editors and writers put all of their unorthodox, or shall we say hetero-orthodox thoughts. That is to say that while the Torah has a certain degree of pluralism to it, a certain degree of debate and argument about certain ideas, and there's differences of opinion about certain things, most of the Torah is pretty ideologically consistent. It has the same set of beliefs from beginning to end. It argues one set of pretty fundamental beliefs. And the books of prophets, the 2nd section of the Hebrew Bible, also a certain degree of difference, certainly literarily different. The prophets are write differently and their voices are different. And yet, there too, there is a pretty consistent ideology, pretty consistent set of ideas, beliefs about how the world works, and who's in charge, and what's right and what's wrong, and what we're for and what we're against. It's when you get to the third section of the Hebrew Bible, what we call Ketuvim. This third section, here is where you find all of the repressed doubts, all of the repressed skepticism, all of the repressed ideas, the questions that were unanswered in the first two sections of the Bible. So here is where you get books which really challenge the orthodoxy, small o orthodoxy, that challenge the accepted conventional beliefs that are present in the rest of the Bible. So you have a book like Job, which is a direct contradiction of the way that the rest of the Bible understands the whole issue of divine justice, and does virtue bring rewards, and is God in charge of the universe, and is God just and right, and is there, does a good person get rewarded and an evil person suffer? I mean, the book of Job just opens this up completely and remarkably, with remarkable power and remarkable frankness. You have a book like Psalms, which is mostly a set of poems celebrating God's goodness and God's greatness. But then you have a series of Psalms stuck in there, which are Psalms of kvetch. That's my own term. Psalms of complaint, where the psalmist is saying, how come this is happening to me, God, and you're not fixing it? And which is a very heterodox idea. I mean, it's an idea like, what? I thought you were in charge of the universe. What's going on? And same thing in the book of Proverbs. You have mostly conventional beliefs in the book of Proverbs, but a few sections that say, be careful. Don't be too pure about this stuff. And we're going to get to Kohelet. We're going to get to Ecclesiastes, which is a book just chock full of doubt, Now, the book of Esther, which we're looking at today, the book of Esther, which is, of course, the Purim book, I suggested to you that on its surface is simply a fun fairy tale. And, it all's well as ends well. It starts out with a beautiful, it has all the elements of a wonderful romantic comedy, right? You have a goofy king, you have a beautiful princess, you have a brave hero, you have a mean, evil guy. It's a melodrama. You know exactly who the good guys and who the bad guys are. And you know what's going to happen in the end. You know that the good guys are going to win in the end. You just don't know how it's going to happen. Incidentally, one of the most remarkable efforts in this vein in the last sort of generation, did you see the show Wicked? Anybody see the show Wicked? You haven't seen it? It's going to come out as a movie soon. So it was a decent book, a great Broadway show. One of the most popular Broadway shows in our time. And the story Wicked, you know what Wicked is? They take the Wizard of Oz story and turn it upside down. And they give you sort of the backstory of all the characters. How did the Wicked Witch of the West get so wicked? And was she really wicked? And how did the Good Witch of the North get to be her? And what was Dorothy's role in the story? And I'll give away the story because the music is worth seeing, even if you give them the story. In the end, by the time you get to Wicked, you realize that the Wicked Witch is really the good guy, that the Good Witch of the North is really a mindless ditz, that the Wizard of Oz is really a very bad man, a really, really bad guy, a predator, basically, right? And Dorothy is like a spoiled brat who shows up in this thing and just messes up everything that should have been right. And you're cheering for the witch and you're booing Dorothy. And I imagine if you had one of these days, I'm going to write the Purim story the same way. I mean, I want to write a Purim story where Haman's the good guy, Mordecai's the bad guy, and Esther is sort of a mindless character. The way that it's written in the Bible as we have it is such a melodrama. Every character is sort of one-dimensional, except when you start to really read it carefully. And when you start to read it carefully, you realize this is not a melodrama. This is not even a comedy. In some ways, it's the exact opposite of a comedy. Because the question that the book of Esther asks us to imagine is, suppose the universe is not governed by a just and loving God who keeps the rules. Suppose the universe is governed randomly. There's no governance at all in the universe. It's all just random. It's a throw of the dice. The word Purim, as we'll see today as we get into the third chapter, the word Purim is a Persian word for dice, for a throw of the dice. And the question of the book of Purim is, suppose the universe is just random. It's a throw of the dice. You have this foolish king who rules the world but doesn't have any wisdom whatsoever, and frankly, no intelligence, because he makes decisions and can never see the natural outcomes of his decisions. He never thinks one step ahead. You have heroes who are very unlikely heroes. You have a Jewish hero who's named for a Babylonian god. You have a heroine, a beautiful, beautiful princess who ends up as the wife of the Persian king, which is not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to go marry foreigners, right? And now you're going to get the bad guy. And the story is a really strange story. And in the end, what I'm going to suggest is that what we have here is a very serious reflection on a very serious theological or philosophical idea. How do you conduct yourself if you find yourself in a world in which there is no moral rules, where there is no moral rule, which there are no rules, there is no order? How should you conduct yourself in such a world? How do you keep yourself alive? How does good triumph over evil? How does the Jewish people protect itself in such a world? Because that's the world we find ourselves living in. Now, that's a complete diametric contradiction to what the Torah teaches us, where there's a God who governs everything. But the point of the book of Esther is to take this very difficult to hear truth and to wrap it in a ridiculous story. And the more ridiculous the story, the deeper and more difficult the truth that it's trying to present to us. And that's really the essence of this book of Esther. So we've seen the first two chapters. We introduced Achashverosh and his wine feasts. We've introduced Mordechai and Esther. When we last left our heroes, Esther had become the queen of Persia, married the king. A great banquet was given to celebrate their marriage. And as I said, as we pointed out, and the way you know it's a Jewish story, is that the king gave a gift to the entire kingdom. He canceled income taxes for the year. Only a Jewish writer would think that this is something, right? And now we come to the third chapter, in which the dramatic element is added. And the dramatic element is going to be the villain. And the villain presents the sort of impetus, the motivation for the story that's yet to come. Sometime afterwards. So this is an indeterminate time. We don't know exactly how much time it is. Later, we'll find out that it's 9 years later. Esther has been living in the palace as the queen for 9 years. Okay? King Achashverosh promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. He advanced him and seated him higher than any of the other officials. All the king's courtiers in the palace gate knelt and bowed low to Haman, for such was the king's order concerning him. But Mordechai would not kneel or bow low. Now, we don't know anything about the backstory. We don't know who Haman is. We don't know where he came from. We don't know how it is. He's not listed. In chapter 1, we had a whole list of the king's advisors. Remember, the people he consulted when he had to figure out what to do about Vashti? Haman's not listed among them. So why is it that all of a sudden a guy who's not one of the principal court advisors gets promoted to be the right-hand man of the king? We don't know. We don't know what the king's thoughts were. We don't know why he got chosen. We don't know what the backstory is. We don't know if Mordechai and Haman have some kind of relationship. What if Mordechai and Haman went to high school together? What if this is a personal vendetta? What if this is, they've had business together? Mordechai is, after all, an important guy in the court. He's an important guy in the kingdom. One would presume that he would know all the important people. A man like Haman who gets elected or gets chosen to be the king's advisor would have come across him at some point. We don't know what their backstory is. There is, however, one interesting note that the story throws in just at the end here, okay? At the very end, which we didn't pick up last time. So Esther is now the queen, and there's a banquet and a celebration. But look at the very end of chapter 2, a little bit of a vignette, a little vignette that's just thrown in. At that time, when Mordecai was sitting in the palace gate, of course, is the transaction point between the city and the palace. So this is an important place, and the gate is where the courts sat. The gate is where business was conducted. The gate was because everybody passed through. This was where you posted anything important, right? Bigdan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. So these two eunuchs are typically servants of the king, and they became angry. We don't know about what, and they plotted to do away with Ahasuerus. We have an internal plot. Mordecai learned of it. Now, how did Mordecai learn of it? Well, because he knows things. That's going to be his forte. He has his ear to the ground, we would say. He knows stuff, and he learns of this plot. And he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be so, and so the two were impaled on stakes. Ouch. So they hung the two guys. This was recorded in the book of annals at the insistence of the king. But nothing, we don't know what happens to Mordecai. Nothing ever happened to Mordecai. The next thing that happens is Haman gets elevated. So the question is, if Mordecai saved the life of the king, why isn't he the one getting elevated? So one issue is a personal kind of issue. And that may be one of the reasons why Mordecai did not kneel or bow low. The Midrashic tradition, the rabbinic tradition, read that and said, well, there's two reasons he didn't kneel. Number one, he could see the evil that was in Haman's heart, and he would not bow to that evil. And then the other thing is that Haman worshipped idols and carried them with him all the time. And Mordecai didn't want anyone to think that he was bowing down to Haman's gods. But we don't know why he wouldn't bow low. Now, when we were in Hebrew school, the question was, Jews don't bow. But that's not really true. I mean, if you visit the Queen of England, you do a little bow. I mean, you do the right thing, You're not bowing to a god. You're not worshiping him, but you're, showing civil behavior to an authority higher than you. Then the king's courtiers who were in the palace gate said to Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's order? The king ordered everyone to bow before Haman, right? But Mordecai disobeyed. He disobeys the king's order to bow before Haman. When they spoke to him day after day, he wouldn't listen to them. Every day they want to know, why won't you bow? And this becomes a sort of element of gossip. Everyone sees Mordecai coming. They start whispering, he's the guy that isn't bowing. And pretty soon somebody told Haman. Somebody told Haman to see if Mordecai's resolved, to see if Haman knows that Mordecai, if he doesn't bow and Haman doesn't know it, so nothing bad can happen to you. But if Haman knows it, it could be dangerous. And then this sentence adds this little phrase. He explained to them that he was a Jew. Now, what does that have to do with it? What does it have to do with it? Right? Now, who explained to who? The problem with that phrase is that all the pronouns are indeterminate. Is it that Mordecai explained to the people of the palace that he was Jewish? Or was it that Haman told them that he was Jewish? In other words, when the people of the palace came to Haman and said, Mordecai isn't bowing to you, and the king had ordered everyone to bow, and Mordecai is disobeying it, Haman turns to them and says, yeah, and he's a Jew. Is it Haman who told him he was a Jew? Doesn't say. Could be Mordecai who said it. Could be Haman who said it. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage. How come? How come? The whole kingdom bows to this guy. Everybody bows except one guy. Why does it bother him? Why does it bother him? Well, it bothers him for two reasons. One is a sort of psychological reason. The psychological reason is that when you're an insecure person is worried about the one criticism. I always tell my rabbinical students, I teach young rabbis, and I teach them how to give sermons, right? And I say to them, let me tell you what's going to happen, right? There's always going to be someone in the synagogue who hates your sermon. And the truth of the matter is they don't hate your sermon. They don't like you. And the reason they don't like you has nothing to do with you. It's because you remind them of the rabbi they grew up with and they didn't like him. Or you remind them of their father and they didn't like him. Or you remind them of a classmate in high school who was mean to them and they didn't like him, and they're going to project that on you. And there's always going to be somebody who says to you, "Oh, a terrible sermon, Rabbi." And you got to get used to that. You got to have a thick enough skin to know you're not going to please everybody. You're not going to please. So here's Haman, and he's very insecure. And the very insecure Haman wants everyone to love him. He wants everyone to love him. It's important to him that everyone does, because there's a phenomenon in psychology called the missing tile phenomenon. You know what the missing tile phenomenon is? You have a huge ceiling, and the ceiling's covered with tiles, and it's all white tile, but there's one tile missing. So what does your eye catch? The one that's missing. Anyone ever have a white sweater and get a little bit of gravy on it, and then all you can see when you look at the sweater is the spot of gravy? It's a teeny little spot of gravy in a giant white sweater or a white jacket or a white outfit. And that's why I don't wear white when I go out to eat, because I wear my lunch. But that's all you see. You can't see that as a beautiful white shirt. All you see is the one thing. If there's one thing missing, that's what we tend to look at. That's the psychological reason. Then there's a deeper reason, a political reason. Haman is a totalitarian personality. The word totalitarian tells you something. He wants total power. He wants wall-to-wall control. It bothers him terribly if there's anyone who is an exception to the law, an exception to the rule. It bothers him terribly that there's anyone who's immune from his authority. It bothers him terribly that anyone disobeys. And we Jews have always been the exception to somebody's rule. We have always been the odd man out. We have always been the one who forced the majority to question their premises when they said, well, everyone has a Christmas tree. Everyone has lights on there. Everyone has. And we would say, yeah, except for us. I don't know how many of you were the 1 or 2 or 3 Jewish kids in the class when Christmas time came, and you were the ones who said, I'm not singing those songs in this Christmas assembly. And the teacher said, well, all right, we'll sing your dreidel song for you. And it was like this, that kind of personality that wants to control it all, that needs to control it all. And someone comes along and says, yes, except for me. And he can't tolerate that. He can't tolerate that except for me quality. And so they come to Haman. Haman knows that he's a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow down, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, having been told who Mordecai's people were. Why kill just him? Let's show him how powerful we are. Let's kill his entire people. Let's kill all of his people. So Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. Now, presumably they've been living there for a very long time, so they're deeply assimilated, which means you're dealing with a deeply assimilated minority within a large majority. And how do you do that? How is he going to pull that one off? Now comes the name of the holiday. In the first month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Purim, which means the lot or the dice, was cast before Haman concerning every day and every month. This was well known, by the way, that ancient rulers would consult astrologers to know which was the fortuitous day to carry out a particular policy. And in this case, the way that he did it was he had dice, and they were numbered 1 to 12. That gave you the month. And then he had dice numbered 1 to 30, and that would give you the day. right? So that he cast the lots, and the image of casting lots to carry out a plot like this is what I said earlier, is the refutation of the Torah. He said the Torah talks about a God of justice, a God who's in control, a God who's watching out for the world, a God who's carrying the world towards certain goals and ends and objectives. But here, it's a throw of the dice. He's going to wipe out an entire people by a throw of the dice. And it falls out a year later on the 12th month. This is the first month. It comes out on the 12th month, the month of Adar, right? And now he has to convince the king to do it. So Haman comes to Achashverosh and he makes a speech. And this is such a great speech because this is the first articulation of classical anti-Semitism in all of world literature. You know, Pharaoh didn't like us, but it wasn't that he didn't like us. He did like us. He wanted us to be slaves. He didn't like us to be free. But Haman's the first one who wants to destroy the Jews because they're Jews, because they're a threat in some way. And he goes to Achashverosh and he makes this speech. There is a certain people. Now that's so interesting. Now remember, this is a people that is highly assimilated, but Haman says, no, they are identifiable. There is an identifiable minority that has not melded into the majority of our kingdom. They are scattered and dispersed among all the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm. He rules 127 countries. That's a lot of places to have Jews hiding out. And what have the Jews done? They're scattered and dispersed. You see, if the Jews all lived in the same place and they were identifiable, you know, they had horns, they had big noses, they had something, then they wouldn't be as much a threat. You know what's so threatening about you guys? You look like us. You talk like us. You live like us. We don't know where you are. You know, an enemy that's identifiable is scary, but an enemy that's invisible is even scarier. You Jews are invisible. You're all over, and yet you're not like us, because whose laws are different from any other people and who do not obey the king's laws. They're disobedient because they have their own ways. Now remember, what was the theory? The theory was that if you conquer an ancient people, you have to take them back to the imperial capital. And there you settle them by the waters of Babylon, for example, because there they're going to assimilate, uprooted from their land, taken away from the populace that speaks their language, separated from their culture, isolated from their traditions, put into a foreign place. They will assimilate and become like everybody else. And that works with everybody. That's why there's none of those ancient peoples around anymore. No Moabites, no Amalekites, no Midianites, none of those ites. None of them around anymore, except for one. Only one people maintained its identity in this, and that's us, the Jews. And you Jews, there's something uncanny about that. Something weird, strange, unnatural. You were supposed to disappear. We took you away from your land, away from your language, away from your people. You were supposed to disappear, but you didn't. Now, remember, Mordechai is 5 generations from the exile. 5 generations into diaspora, you maintain your identity. How do you do that? Something uncanny, something mysterious and threatening is happening here, says Haman to Achashverosh. It is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. If it please your majesty, let an edict be drawn for their destruction. Everything's done by edict in Persia. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the stewards for the deposit in the royal treasury. That's an enormous amount of money. He's going to pay for them. Thereupon the king removed his signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman. Signet ring is how you sign documents. The foe of the Jews. And the king said, the money and the people are yours to do as you see fit. This is the death sentence on the Jews of Persia. And it's serious. And it's terribly serious. And this is what Haman decrees, right? So on the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned. A decree was issued as Haman directed to the king's satraps, all the little kingdoms, all the little princes and governors of each province, and the officials of every people, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. So Ahasuerus has enough tolerance of the differences in his kingdom to make sure that every edict is translated into 127 different languages, so that when it goes out to you, you'll hear it in your own language. But he's willing to off the Jews in one fell swoop, in one moment. That's the contradiction. The orders were issued in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet. Accordingly, written instructions were dispatched by the courtiers to all the king's provinces to destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews. Just make sure you get that. Destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day, the 13th of the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. The text of the document was in effect, and a law would be proclaimed in every single province. It would be publicly displayed to all the people, so they'd be ready for that day. The courtiers went out post haste on a royal mission. The decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. The king and Haman sat down to feast, but the city of Shushan was dumbfounded. Now, why? That image is so beautiful. The king and Haman sat down to have lunch, and nobody else could figure out what the hell was going on, because it had been 5 generations since Jews arrived in Persia, and they were thoroughly assimilated into the life of the kingdom. 5 generations. And all of a sudden, we're to kill them all on a certain day, a year from now? What's going on? Why would they do such a? Why would the king do such a thing? And this image that the kingdom is dumbfounded, but Haman and Ahasuerus sat down and had lunch. They sat down and had lunch in the middle of a decreeing genocide. You remember the great philosopher Hannah Arendt, her observations about Adolf Eichmann, that Adolf Eichmann wasn't the evil mastermind of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. He was just a bureaucrat. He was an ordinary man doing ordinary things. It just happened that they had extraordinary evil consequences. And here too, the idea that the king and Haman sit down and they just have lunch, and nothing is unusual. There's nothing unusual about what they've just set in motion. It's just, they just had lunch. It also reminds you, for example, in the book of Genesis, when Joseph's brothers take him and throw him into the pit, and then they sit down and have lunch. And they don't hear his screams, and they don't see his pain, and they don't understand. They have no sense of what they've just done. And that's the sensibility that you get here. So who is Haman? Who is Haman? What kind of guy is Haman? We have a man here who wants to control it all and needs to destroy any exception to his authority, any challenge to his power, anyone who is outside of the boundaries of his office. And that's who the Jews are, and so they have to be destroyed. Okay, take a moment, everybody breathe. Questions, counter sermons, better interpretations. Yeah, Stanley, please, go ahead.
Yeah, good question. We as, let's say, liberal, conservative, non-Orthodox Jews say, well, this is probably a story that was put into the Bible with certain lessons. Does the Orthodox community still say, well, these are events that actually happened. We don't know exactly necessarily, but they are events, and that's why they're in the Bible. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, we're going to talk about this tonight if you want to tune in. I'm going to do a session tonight on is the Torah true? You know, the Jewish people always believe that the events taught in the Bible actually happened, but we always admitted interpretation. So there's a very rich midrashic tradition around the book of Esther, and of expanding and exploring all of its meanings. But yeah, if you ask my Orthodox cousins, did it happen? They would say absolutely it happened, just like this. Absolutely. By the way, if you ask any Persian Jew, did it happen? They'll tell you it happened, because this is the founding document of the Persian Jewish community. Yes, Bert, please.
Earlier in the story, they go through this relatively large list of advisors
Yes.
the king has.
Yeah.
It seems to me it's a little unlikely that at least one of them wouldn't have found a way to say to him, you know, you're going to kill the tax base.
Yes. Very good. I mean, what should someone have said to him? And here's the irony of the story, Bert. When it came to offing Vashti, he has to consult with his advisors. We all saw that as the most obvious decision in the world. The queen verbally, publicly, blatantly disobeyed the king's order. And so in order to kill off one queen, he needs to consult, he needs to work it out, he needs to get legal authority. Now we have a populace of Jews who presumably are pretty, if Mordecai is as high up in the kingdom as we know he is, you imagine that there are other Jews also that are pretty high up, that there's a tax base, exactly right, that there's commerce, that there's people in academics. And in order to off them, he does it in a moment with no consultation whatsoever. And you'd imagine that someone would have come to him and say, first of all, King, this is not going to be an easy thing to do. They're in every province and they look just like us. We have to go find them first. And second of all, they're well connected. And it's going to be a real upheaval in the community because everyone's married to everybody else. And third of all, why would you want to do this? What have the Jews ever done? How have they ever shown disloyalty up till now? You know, Mordecai saved your life. How could they ever shown disloyalty up until now? But that's the point. That's what makes the story remarkable, that Haman somehow gets him to pay attention. Haman gets him to agree just like that without consulting with the advisors and without considering the consequences of the decision. This is characteristic of Achashverosh politics. He makes decisions without considering the consequences of those decisions. Because if he'd stopped and thought about what he was going to do and what's going to happen next, he might have made a very different decision. That's classic Achashverosh. Okay, David, Andy, and then Ed. David, go ahead.
It just struck me that this terrible thing for Jews, of course, repeated itself in history. You know, in Spain in 1492. You know, this is not the only time. And I was just wondering if you think that this is part of this story is, I don't know, in some way as a warning to Jews that this is, you get it. You got what I'm saying.
No, it's exactly the right point. So you're dragging me to the end of the lecture, but the end of the lecture is this. Next time, I think that this story is remarkable. I think it's prescient because I think it does anticipate what you're talking about. Jews are going to live in diaspora for about 1,800 years or more, 2,800 years. Jews in diaspora are going to have to deal with kings like Achashverosh and bad guys like Haman. This is a handbook on how to live in that universe, how to survive that universe. And it's a handbook, and you'll see what strategies work and what strategies don't. And again, what we have here is a deeply serious, I would say deadly serious book about genocide wrapped up in a ribald, melodramatic comedy. As if to say, if I have to deliver a tough truth, I'm going to do it in a way that, I'm going to wrap it up in something that sort of disguises it, because otherwise it would be either too hard to take or too easy to dismiss. And so you have this brutal truth. You live in a world of genocide delivered to you in this wonderful, silly, ribald comedy. That's exactly what you're reading now. And it's not just about Jews. You could even go one more step and take that Jews in this case are a symbol for those who stand for good in the world. And evil, this is a question of how good people survive in an evil, chaotic world. How good people survive in an evil, chaotic world, right? I don't want to get into the politics of it, but listening to the interviews with Anthony Fauci after the election, where he started to talk about, not evil, but just chaos, just talking about a White House that just didn't take the pandemic seriously and didn't know what to do about it, and really didn't know what to do with it, and how he felt like he wasn't listened to, and that's such an interesting point of view. I'm not evil, but I mean, you could say it's evil, but I'm not making that judgment. But how a man who is good and wants to do what is right deals with a chaotic situation in which he feels he isn't being attended to and listened to. A really interesting kind of question. And this book is about that question. If you're trying to do good in a world of chaos, what do you watch out for? How do you do it? That's going to be one of the lessons of the book. That's one of the lessons of the book. Andy.
There we go. I actually have 2 points. I know we were talking about how we were seeing the transition from how Haman was able to do something very quickly and the change of how the policies and procedures were done. Does everyone understand this was 12 years after the queen was killed to now? Like that time changes. Notice the advisors that were mentioned in the beginning of the story aren't even mentioned now. So now you have a whole thing where we don't know how Haman came in and has changed the culture, and how governments change, and that lower hierarchy has now changed. So the influence is it could be totally circumvented, where in the past there was all these processes we had to go through. And actually, Rabbi, you stole my whole second part, which was basically saying that I believe that the reason why, God in this case, or anyone, is not intervening and saying, hey, time out, you're killing awful people, and we're using logic to say, hey, you're going to affect tax base, you're going to affect, you're really killing people, is because there has to be a moral to the story. We have to learn the story. And obviously, belief in God, and I believe God gives us the opportunity to try to learn from our mistakes, and understand when certain things happen, we need to make those stances earlier, not wait for it and just say, oh, don't worry about it, he's just talking, and go on with your day. Sometimes you have to stand up and make a point.
Well, I mean, you don't even have to say that's a story. I mean, Don Isaac of Barvanel was one of the principal advisors to Ferdinand and Isabel. In fact, many historians believe that Don Isaac of Barvanel was the shadchan. He was the matchmaker who matched Ferdinand and Isabel and united Spain, united Aragon and Castile. And then, a year later, they begin plans to expel the Jews. And Don Isaac of Barvanel goes to the royals and says, don't do this. It's going to be terrible for Spain, because the Jews were their connection with international trade. The Jews controlled all the trade in the Mediterranean as far as China, right? Anything that Spain was doing internationally, the Jews were involved in. By expelling the Jews, Ferdinand and Isabel basically cut themselves off from all of the sources of their, they cut themselves off from their international reach. And within a generation, when Philip sends the Armada to England, that's the end of Spanish power, period. It's the last time Spain was a power in the world, right? Then what happened to the Jews, of course, is they moved to Amsterdam. And then Amsterdam becomes an international trading power, right? I mean, so it's like it was a bad policy. Forget it was right or wrong. It was bad policy. But Achashverosh isn't a policy guy. He can't think one step ahead. That's the problem. And listen, how many times do you read the newspaper and you say, don't they see this as a bad policy? Right? It's a great point, and it's a great point. This is a reflection of the world you live in even today. Mr. Shackman, you're next.
I'm going to pass because it's a little bit been talked about already.
All right, let's take one more line, because I want to raise an issue that Andy raised. Here's the next line of the book. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, went through the streets crying loudly and bitterly until he came to the front of the palace, because he couldn't enter the palace wearing sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Everyone lay in sackcloth and ashes. Okay. Why are they fasting? We know why they're weeping. You now have a decree of genocide with a date on it, signed by the king. So we know why they're sad. And we know why they're praying. Why are they fasting? Why sackcloth and ashes are signs of grief, of mourning, right? Fasting is something different. Fasting is a gesture of repentance in Jewish law. Why are they fasting? Well, here's why. In the Torah, God is the principal actor in history. Anything that's good happens to us is because God blessed us. Anything that's bad happens to us is God's cursed us. Why does God curse us? Well, the book of Deuteronomy says it very clearly. If you obey my mitzvot and follow in my ways, you will be prosperous in the world. And if you turn aside and worship other gods and act foolishly and act impiously, then I will punish you with exile. I will punish you with destruction. So if we're being punished, if we're going to suffer a decree of genocide, it's because we're being punished by God. That's good Torah theology. And if you're being punished by God, what do you need to do? You need to repent the sin. And even if you don't know the sin, even if you can't figure out what sin you did, that's the book of Job, you still repent, because maybe God will change God's mind and God will relent and we won't get destroyed. So the fasting and the weeping and the sackcloth and the ashes and the prayers, that's all repentance behavior, hoping that God will change God's mind and redeem us from this terrible decree. Does it work? No, it doesn't work. What do you mean it doesn't work? The Torah said it's going to work. It's got to work. It's guaranteed to work. No, maybe it worked in Israel. Maybe it worked in the old days. Maybe it works in our imagination universe. But in this chaotic universe of Achashverosh, it don't work. Now, we have just been taught a huge lesson. So let me try to express it this way. Look at the book of Esther for a minute. Step back and look with me. Got four principal characters. I have a silly king. I have his evil advisor. I have a brave hero who's an outsider. And I have a beautiful princess. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Anybody have a kid or a grandkid who watches Disney movies? Anybody have a kid or a grandkid watches Disney movies? What Disney movie happens in the Middle East and has a silly king, an evil advisor, a beautiful princess, and a brave outside hero? And the answer is Aladdin. Of course. You have the king, you have Jafar, right, with the bird on his shoulder. Gilbert Gottfried is the bird. You have beautiful Princess Jasmine. Every little girl in my nursery school wants to be Jasmine, right? And you have the brave Aladdin. It's the same story, or at least it's drawn from the same literary fund. It comes from the same literary structure, right? Very famous kind of stories called Persian court dramas. Aladdin, Scheherazade, 101 Arabian Nights, the whole schmear. Now, what's missing? I got the king, I got Jafar with the bird, I got Jasmine, I got Aladdin. There's another character. Who's missing? What's the other character?
Genie.
The genie. How does Aladdin stop the terrible things from happening? He rubs a lamp, a genie comes, and the genie in the movie, of course, is voiced by the brilliant Oliver Sholem, Robin Williams. One of the most enormously funny performances Robin Williams ever put up. I mean, you have to be a grown-up and you have to watch it carefully a couple of times to catch just how funny this guy is. He's unbelievably funny. The genie, and the genie gives you three wishes. You can have anything you want, right? Right? So wait a minute. In our story, we have a king, we have Haman, we have Esther, we have Mordecai. We need a genie. Who should play the role of the genie? Obviously, it should be
Esther.
God.
no. Esther is the princess. Who should play the role of the genie in a Jewish story in the Bible?
God.
Esther.
God. God
isn't
should play
there.
the role. You should rub your tefillin bag, and God should show up and give you 3 wishes. No, isn't that what it? I mean, come on, guys. You should
He's
rub
not
your
mentioned.
menorah. You rub your menorah, and God shows up, and gives you 3 wishes. Maybe voiced by Theodore Bickel or somebody Jewish, Zero Mostel, or Buddy Hackett. God should give you 3 wishes, but it doesn't work. That's remarkable. It doesn't work. So what's the lesson? God is not your genie. If you're going to survive in this world, if you're going to survive in the world of Achashverosh, you're not going to get 3 wishes from a magical being. That's not the way God works. God may be in this story someplace, but God ain't going to be your genie. So Mordechai goes through the gestures that are the classic Torah gestures of how one relieves a community of suffering. He fasts, he prays, he puts on sackcloth and ashes, he leads the community in prayer. It don't work because that doesn't work in this universe. In this universe, you're going to need a different set of strategies to survive evil. And that is a powerful statement. It is a repudiation, or at least a pushing back of the Torah tradition and a sort of bitter realism, saying, let's be serious, guys. God don't work that way in our world. You want to get saved? There are ways to get saved, but they're not going to be the ways that you thought. Prayer isn't going to do it for you. We're going to need another strategy. And that's what we're going to take up next time. The new strategy for solving the problem of surviving in a chaotic world. Stanley, you get a question, and then we're going to call it a day.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment about Robin Williams. Many years ago, before he was on TV or in the movies, he was in an improv group that the director of that improv group also taught a class in improv comedy who everyone wanted to take it, and I took that class. Sometimes during the week, those actors, the actual professional actors, came to the class and interacted with the class and did the exercises or whatever. So I had the chance of actually interacting with Robin Williams before he became the TV star.
Wow. Robin Williams, Rabbi. Yeah, Sandy, please.
I have a granddaughter here who's visiting me right now, working.
Hi.
And she was at a bat mitzvah last week, and she has a question that I'm going to let her ask her question. It's not about Esther.
Okay. Hello, Gran. What's your name?
Hi guys, I'm Sophie. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Sophie. How you doing? Great to meet you.
Good. Yeah. Okay, so I was at a bat mitzvah, and the girl was reading a portion. We weren't really paying attention, but my dad started laughing. He was like, she just said the word for prostitute. And so we were just like, okay, like let's look at the portion, and we started reading the translation.
Yeah.
And it was kind of talking about, I'm trying to remember, I think it was like Book of Iman. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it kind of was talking about like rules for being a high priest. But then it started talking about like if women were to
Have illicit sex.
Sex before marriage. And it just said, if one were to do that, she has defiled her father and she should be, which is like kind of crazy and like obviously a little misogynistic.
Oh, it's more than a little misogynistic.
Yeah.
It's grossly misogynistic. Let's
surprised.
call it what it is, my
Yeah,
friend.
I was just kind of surprised. I mean, I haven't done a lot of Torah study, but like I thought in general, like Judaism was way more. I know now for sure, like right now, Judaism is
Okay,
like
let me answer your question. It's a great question. Where do you live?
Thousand Oaks, Westlake.
Oh, not far away. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, she
Okay.
can come in and visit you.
I can come in and visit.
Yeah, you can come by. Here's the deal. That rule wasn't about an ordinary woman having sexual relations outside of marriage. That rule is about the daughter of a priest. And because she's the daughter of a priest, she carries certain special obligations. Okay. And because she's the daughter of a priest, her behavior then reflects upon the priesthood, and the priesthood is a very sensitive institution. So that's, I think, what you were referring to. In this particular case, in the Bible had a very different attitude about sex than we grew up with, or that Americans grow up with typically. Okay, in the Bible, first of all, it's a very natural attitude that sex is part of life, and most of us will come into contact with something. We it's part of our lives. It's impossible to sort of escape it as we grow into life. So the first thing is that marriage, the highest form of marriage, not the highest form, the marriage usually takes place between two people of the same social class. Okay, so if you have a wealthy landowner, he marries another woman who's of a wealthy landowner class. Okay, and she becomes his wife, and they have sexual relations, and their children are heirs to the family fortune. Okay, then you have a second kind of level. You have a woman who is of a lower social class, and that woman of a lower social class marries the master of the household. She's called a shifcha, and she is entitled to the protection of the household, entitled to protection of the master. She is like a wife in every sense of the word, except that she's not exactly, doesn't have the same rights and privileges of the main wife, but her children are considered children of the wife. So if you remember, Abraham has relations with a woman named Hagar, who was his wife's maid. That means, it didn't mean she cleaned the house. That means she was a woman of a lower social class who was attached to the woman's household. And the child of that marriage, which was Ishmael, becomes like the son of Sarah. In the same way, when Rachel and Leah marry Jacob, two other women, Bilhah and Zilpah, come along, and their children are considered full heirs, fully part of the community. So this was a way of making sure that every woman had a husband. And if you have a population where you have a lot more women than men, because men go off to war and get themselves killed, right? So then you have an opportunity for a man to marry more than one wife, so that every woman has a household to be attached to in a patriarchal society where women needed men to protect them. Then there's a third level called a concubine, a pilegesh. And a pilegesh is a woman of yet another lower social class who's not really, who can associate herself with the man. It's not like they're married, but there is a committed relationship there. She lives in his household. She eats from his table. She enjoys the protection of his household. But if she has any children, they're not heirs to the fortune of the family. Okay, they'll be in the household, and they can be part of the household, but they're not going to inherit the fortune of the family. Okay, and that's another way for lower class women to get protection from an upper class guy, right? Then you have a fourth level. Is this okay so far? It's a little complicated. You need a map. There's a fourth level called zonah. Okay, now the Hebrew word zonah is often translated as prostitute or whore or something horrible, but it really wasn't. The Hebrew word mazon means to eat, like you have birkat hamazon, the blessing after a meal. And a zonah was typically a woman who ran a tavern. She ran a tavern. She was and if she gave sexual favors, so if she slept with any of her customers, it was considered, not exactly, it wasn't considered a crime like it is in America. And it wasn't considered a terrible, horrible, terrible shame. It was considered not a terribly classy thing to do, but it wasn't a sin. Because she's not married to anybody else, and she's working for a living. And if she were to marry a guy, if she were to have sex with a guy and get pregnant, it would be her child. The guy would be obligated to help provide for that kid, but that kid isn't going to be part of his household in any way. So you have a famous story of Judah and Tamar. And Tamar is actually his daughter-in-law, but she dresses up as a zonah and seduces him. And when he goes to her, right, she says, you slept with me, and the kid becomes part of the household, because it turns out that he was. But being a zonah was not, it wasn't considered a sinful thing. It's just that it's not where sex belongs. Sex belongs in a committed relationship, and a zonah was a woman who had sex outside of committed relationships. The Bible's fundamental idea, which I think is a very sound idea, was that sex is a very powerful connection between human beings, and it belongs in a relationship. And that relationship ideally is responsible and caring and trusting and reciprocal. And it's sexual relations outside of a caring, responsible relationship is dangerous in a certain way because it hurts people, and it can hurt you in many, many, many ways. And that's really how the Jewish tradition thought about it. How's that?
Good. So
Yes.
the burning thing is just like a
She was the high.
No, that was for that. She was
for the priest. Got it.
she was a daughter of a priest who was eating from the priestly table and was expected to remain pure until marriage. So that's a special case. But you don't have to worry about that because we don't have any priests anymore. We don't have a temple anymore, right? And so that now what happens is you don't have that as a threat. You just have to be responsible. All of us have to be responsible. Men and women have to be responsible with their sexuality, and no one's going to be burned for it. But all of us have to be very careful because it is a very powerful spiritual human energy that we share with each other. And it has to be done in a very caring and protective and responsible way. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
I'll come to you.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll for other
All right,
questions.
everybody. I'm delighted. It was a sweet
Thanks,
question.
Rabbi.
I appreciate it. All right, everybody, take care. Have a great week. Stay healthy. I'm teaching tonight at 7 o'clock. If you want a little bit more, we're going to talk about how the Torah, why the Torah is true. Is the Torah true? How we read the Torah. And then, of course, Torah study on Shabbos, and we'll see each other next week.